Your life journey doesn't stand still, and neither should your wealth. Welcome to Wealth on the Move, the podcast. Will Hoffman offers investment advice through Private Advisor Group, which is a federally registered investment advisor. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult with the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Welcome back to another episode of Wealth on the Move, the podcast. I'm your host, Will Hoffman, founder and president of Hoffman Wealth Management. And today we're going to talk about something that fascinates me. And if you are an athlete or a parent of an athlete, this is an episode for you to listen to. We're going to talk about the NIL revolution and all of the financial aspects of how to handle this and prepare for your student athletes' entrance into college sports and the landscape and how it's changed so dramatically. And we have really the authority on NIL, in my opinion. Kristi Dosh is with us. She's the author of the Athletes NIL Playbook. And just to give you a little bit of a background about Kristi, initially was a writer for ESPN, Washington Post, and Sports Business Journal. She's also a consultant for athletic departments and universities on NIL, and the collective has discussions ranging from planning, conference realignment, and navigating this NIL landscape. And just in the lead up, she said she is now teaching attorneys about the NIL landscape. So, Kristi, welcome to Wealth on the Move, the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is my favorite subject to talk about these days, so I'm excited to chat with you about it.
Well, the landscape changing has fascinated me because we have gone from one extreme to the next when it comes to money in college sports, and transitioned from a 10,000-page NCAA rulebook that pretty much told student athletes everything was a no, to this wide open landscape that is in front of them, and now they have to learn to navigate that. So do I understand that correctly when it comes to how that landscape has changed so quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a big shift. The rules changed at the collegiate level in July of 2021, so we're right around the 4-year mark, but it's still changing for high school and youth athletes as additional states agree to allow younger athletes to get involved in this. And so it continues to evolve every single day. It's one of those things, if I go on vacation for 3 days and I come back, something has happened that I totally missed. So I don't do that. If I'm on vacation, I'm still on social media and in my email so that I can keep track.
Yeah, and it is an ever evolving landscape. So to get us started, can you explain to our listeners what is, when we say NIL, what do we mean, and how has this changed over the last 4 years?
So to go big picture, everyone in the United States has what's called a right of publicity. You have the right to market and profit off of your own name, image, and likeness. And for a long time, the NCAA, as well as the NAIA, the NJCAA, the high school athletic associations, they've all precluded athletes from taking part in this. And athletes have agreed to it through contracts and other agreements that they've signed as they enter the NCAA, where they agree to abide by the rules. And one of those longstanding rules has been that you can't profit off your name, image, or likeness. And I used to be a practicing attorney, and one of the very first things I covered as a sports business reporter was the Ed O'Bannon case. So this was over a decade ago. We're talking like 15 years ago now. And Ed O'Bannon believed that there was an athlete in the NCAA basketball game put out by EA Sports who looked just like him. It actually did not use his name, but everything from his height to the position he played to what he looked like, it was very clear that it was him.
I mean, they were evident. Their hairstyles and eye color and everything was spot on.
Yeah, he was pretty certain that it was him. And so he sued the NCAA and EA Sports, as well as a licensing company that's sort of the go-between between EA Sports and the NCAA. And the result of that case was that what he wanted was for EA Sports to no longer produce the game until such a time when they could compensate the athletes. And the NCAA, of course, was not willing to change the rules at that point in time. So the game did go away. And there was actually another case at the same time with an athlete named Sam Keller.
He won that case.
Yeah, that case, and the Sam Keller case, they were settled. Well, I'm sorry, Keller's case was settled, and there was some money that was given to athletes who had been depicted in the games. O'Bannon's case did go to trial in the Ninth Circuit. This is important only because if you see the major decisions that are made in college athletics today in court, it's almost always in the Ninth Circuit. And almost all of those cases have one judge in common, Judge Claudia Wilken, who's now retiring, I hear. So we won't be hearing from her anymore, but she has played a major role, I would say, in every case that has made a shift in college athletics in the last 15 years, she has been a part of. And the ultimate outcome of that case was that the game stopped being made. And in fact, the basketball game still has not come back. The
Right.
football game came back in 2024, and I believe they've said basketball will be back in 2028. But that was the first case I ever reported on. And so I've been thinking about NIL for 15 plus years in the college space. And I really did not think we would get to where we are. In fact, I wrote a book on the business of college athletics that came out in 2013. And I had a whole chapter there with all the reasons why I thought athletes would never be compensated. And some of that still stands in the sense that they still have not been deemed employees and are not being treated that way. But I wasn't even sure we would get to where we are with NIL. And then with this school year, we have revenue sharing, but let's put a pin in that for a minute
Sure.
because that's all brand new. But in 2021, the rules were changed. There's a little bit of a long history where the state of California passed a state law where they were going to allow high school and college athletes to be compensated. And it was sort of a dare with the NCAA, like, come stop us, you know? And I thought the NCAA would. I thought they would put up a fight. But what ended up happening was other states in very quick succession passed similar laws. I think Colorado was second, Florida, where I live, was third, and they just kept coming. And so in the summer of 2021, the NCAA started to promulgate ideas for, well, really the beginning of 2021, January of 2021, they had a set of rules they were going to vote on. They ended up getting a letter from the Justice Department that stopped them. And it all got pushed out till the summer. And Florida had set that their law would begin July 1st of 2021. And that was the earliest a date had been set. I think California's was 2023. And so they were kind of up against this clock that they needed to change the rules before July 1st, 2021, or what? Like, were they going to allow schools in Florida to still compete in the NCAA if they weren't following the NCAA rules about NIL? Were they going to let athletes in Florida be compensated? So long story short, they did change their rules in the 11th hour at the very end of June in 2021 and allowed student athletes to begin receiving compensation for their name, image, and likeness. And that can look like a lot of different things. It can be putting up a social media post on behalf of a brand. It can be signing autographs, creating your own merchandise to sell. We can dig into that more, but there's a lot of different ways to do it. The NAIA, they actually passed their rules a little earlier. They were October of 2020. I believe the NJCAA was July 1st, 2021, like the NCAA was. And so it came to college in a pretty short period of time across all of the organizations. And then high school has trailed behind that. Some of those state laws I mentioned addressed high school, but most did not. And it was up to state high school associations to make those decisions. And I believe we're now up to somewhere in the low 40s for the number of states that allow it. So it's almost every state, but it is not every state yet.
So in 40 states, high school athletes can also use their name, image, and likeness social media presence to represent brands and get paid.
Yes. Now I will caveat that with each state high school association rules look a little different. Some of them
Sure.
have what we call prohibited categories. You can't promote brands that are in the tobacco or alcohol space, for example. Some have rules about whether or not you can reference the team that you're on. In some states that's okay, in other states it's not. So you definitely need to check out your state high school association rules to make sure you're following them.
Wow. So we went from really one of the strictest environments imaginable to complete Wild West lawlessness when it comes to name, image, and likeness and money changing hands.
Yeah, that's the label it gets most often is the Wild West. It's messy. It's messy in the sense that we still have differing laws across the states. We still have differing rules across high school associations. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a brand last week about a deal for me. And as we were talking about my deal, they said, we really want to do more deals with college athletes, but we're scared. We don't really understand what the rules are and how to do it safely. So we just aren't doing it at all. So actually part of my deal with them is going to be that I'm going to do NIL education for their staff, because there's brands that want to get involved, but the nature of the laws and the rules across the space can be really confusing. And it's the same for parents and athletes. I get emails all the time from parents who say, well, we live in this state, but my student athlete has committed to a school in this state, which rules apply right now when their season's over in high school, but they haven't started college yet. Anyway, so we get these kind of questions all the time because it is confusing.
Yeah, it is. And I hope as a parent of 3 boys that I'm going to have the option to be confused at some point in time, because it means that they're doing well and having these options in front of them. So I polled a couple athletic directors and friends of mine with kids that are looking at colleges and looking at sports and colleges to get some questions that I kind of wanted to start with. And the first one is, how should the student athletes be evaluating the deals that they have? What decision bullets should they be looking for when it comes to making a decision about an NIL deal?
Yeah, you definitely want something in writing. I would say the time when it gets messiest and when we see a lot, I run a Facebook group full of parents that can ask NIL questions anytime that they want. And between that and my emails and my DMs, what I get the most usually comes from the fact that there is not a written contract. And it's a he said, she said. They thought they wrote something down during a phone conversation, or they're piecing together DMs to say what they thought the brand promised or the timing for things. So I absolutely think that you need something written, and it needs to have some basic terms in it. How long does this relationship last with the brand? How much is the athlete being compensated? But what exactly is the athlete doing for that compensation? I teach NIL at University of Florida in the graduate and undergraduate sports management program. And one of the exercises I have them do is look at some contracts that real athletes have received. We redact out the brand name and the athlete's name, but the athletes have given me permission to use these. And one of the issues in actually all 3 of the contracts that I use is they don't really define what you call the deliverables. So if the athlete's getting paid, $500, what are they getting paid $500 to do? It should be very specific. And we'll see things like $500 for posts on social media. Well, what channel? Instagram, TikTok, YouTube? Are we talking a photograph? Is it a reel? Is it a 5-minute video? Like, you need enough description so that it is very clear what you are doing for that amount of money. And when are you going to get paid? Is it 30 days after it posts? Is it 90 days? So it needs to be very clear about that. And there are a number of, with my lawyer hat on, there are a number of other contractual concerns, but just those few things will clear up a lot. And you mentioned my book before, the Athletes NIL Playbook. I did an entire chapter just on contracts, because what I have found is that athletes and their parents are not always willing to go hire an attorney to look at these contracts. Sometimes they feel like the contract isn't for enough money for it to be worth it. Although, side note on that, I have a whole list of attorneys on my Business of College Sports website who practice in this NIL space. Many of them do free consultations. Many of them base their fee on how much the contract is. And so they're only taking a tiny piece of it. So if it's only for $500, they're not going to charge you their normal $450 an hour rate. Obviously, that doesn't make sense for a $500 contract. But if you...
Because that was one of the questions, keeping your legal hat on, should these athletes have an agent, or are there agents that can represent them in these deals? Is it, and how do they know when it's time to have an agent?
There are not enough agents for the number of athletes who want an agent. But I also think a lot of the athletes who want an agent don't even necessarily need one. They really just need an attorney. They really just need somebody to look over the contract. One of the things I caution people about when we get into talking about the agent space is that there is no regulation really of agents in the NIL space. Anyone can call themselves an NIL agent. Every single person listening to this can walk out their front door and start calling themselves an NIL agent. Please don't do it. But technically you could, because the NCAA has no guidelines for who can be an NIL agent. And in fact, I just got back from going to speak for the NBA at their junior NBA and WNBA program. And what they brought me in to speak on was hiring an agent because they know that the NCAA isn't regulating it. Whereas the professional leagues, they do all regulate it.
Right.
They require agents to be certified. They pay fees. They take exams. They are governed by certain rules and restrictions by the league. Well, the NCAA isn't doing that. And so by the time athletes now are getting into the pro leagues, they've sometimes already signed a really bad deal or have already hired a really bad agent. And so, hats off to the NBA, and not just for hiring me, but for hiring somebody to come in and talk about to these athletes. I was there in front of 16 and 17-year-olds who have no idea how to hire
Right.
an agent, that they've never had to do that before. And I've had agents. I've had 2 broadcast agents and 2 literary agents, and so I'm able to talk to them about my own experience, including mistakes I've made. And I was hiring people once I was already an attorney, and like there are still things I didn't ask that I should have. And so there's also a whole chapter in the book about hiring an agent, and it includes a list of questions you should ask an agent before you hire them, because this space is unregulated and there are bad actors out there. And we've already seen athletes who have been taken advantage of by these so-called athletes. So, you asked when you know that that you need an agent. I would say to need an agent, you need tens of thousands of tens of thousands of dollars in NIL deals on the
Okay.
table before that makes any sense, or before you would get anyone interested in you, because there's not enough real agents to go around for the number
Gotcha.
of athletes there are. Athletes get agents based on 2 things. You're either one of the top recruits in your field. So like these junior NBA players I was talking to, they can all get an agent because they're like the top 25 ranked high school athletes in the
Oh,
country.
okay.
So agents are going to want to be with them because they want to develop a relationship with them in the hopes that that relationship carries on into their pro career. So athletes who are at the top of their sport, but particularly in football, men's and women's basketball, baseball, softball to some degree, tennis, golf, track and field. I mean, some sports lend themselves to it a little more than others. They might get it based solely on how good they are on the field. And then other athletes are going to get it based on their followers. If they've got
Okay.
tens of thousands, but more likely hundreds of thousands of followers, then they're going to get agents interested because there are going to be social media marketing deals that are going to be worth it for those agents. So until you're in one of those situations, you're going to find it really hard to get an agent, but you're just as well off getting an attorney who can look over your contracts. Everybody thinks hiring an agent means all of a sudden they're going to be getting, more deals than they can do. That's how you make all the money. An agent's going to bring you all this stuff. A lot of agents aren't going to bring you anything. They're just helping you negotiate the deals you already have, unfortunately. Some of them are good and they've got good relationships with brands and they can bring you new deals, but not everyone who thinks they need an agent really does. But the attorney thing, and look, you can't hire me. I don't represent people, so this is not
Oh, okay.
self-serving. But I do believe that having an attorney can keep athletes out of a lot of the bad situations that I've seen, both with brands and with NIL collectives. And now, as we move into revenue sharing, you're going to be dealing with contracts from the university as well. I would strongly encourage athletes to never sign a contract from a university or from that university's NIL collective without having an attorney review them. I've seen these things, and trust me, you need an attorney.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you. Continuing in that space, there's tax implications for these student athletes and for parents, I'm assuming. And this changes the whole landscape of, I mean, listen, I went to a small branch campus to try to play basketball. It didn't go so well. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to buy beer on Friday nights. And now you have these student athletes with, potentially, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And they now have financial concerns, tax concerns, liability concerns. They have investment concerns, mostly from a tax standpoint. And I don't know if you can speak to this. What implications is this having for the student athletes, for their parents? And then I have another question on top of that after we talk about taxes.
So, not an accountant, but I'll give you what I do know, which is athletes are going to receive 1099s
Okay.
if they're doing brand deals. I think the threshold for a 1099 is $600.
Yeah.
So you're going to receive a 1099 for any deal you do more than that, or if you've got deals in the aggregate with a brand over the course of a year. Also at that level, when you get to that 600 threshold, not only are you going to get a 1099, you also have to turn the NIL deal into the NIL clearinghouse, which is called NIL Go, if you are a Division 1 athlete. If you're Division 2
Okay.
or Division 3, you don't have to worry about it. But for Division 1, any deal more than 600 or deals with the same brand or individual in excess of 600, once you hit that $600 threshold, you have to submit that to this NIL Go. That's sort of a whole nother subject, but 600 for the 1099s. But that's kind of a magic number in a couple of different places. And then you are going to have to file taxes. And
Mm-hmm.
it hasn't been highly publicized because athletes obviously don't want to talk about this publicly, but I know quite a few athletes who got a year or two into NIL and were like, wait, I have to file taxes?
Right.
And had already missed a deadline, had no idea that they had to file taxes. But also, for most of them, it's probably going to be the first time they've ever filed taxes. Some schools have set up clinics that help athletes with this. I know even some NIL collectives have helped their athletes
Good.
with taxes. There's a lot of resources out there. I know H&R Block has been really active in the NIL space since the
Oh,
beginning.
that's good.
They come in and they do NIL deals with very visible athletes to talk about their services and how they can work with athletes on their tax returns, and that they're familiar with what's happening in the NIL space. I can't vouch for them except that I know they've done a lot of NIL deals, so they're familiar with the space from that perspective. The one question I had, which maybe someone else might have, and I'll clear it up because I went and talked to a couple of FAFSA experts because I had a friend who
my
was a
next
CPA.
question. Yeah.
I had a friend who was a CPA, and she said, I'm worried that if an athlete is earning a lot, they might actually disadvantage their younger siblings because it might make the household income larger, and
Well,
therefore
I mean,
these
all
younger
of it.
siblings are going to have problems.
If I went to a small Division 3 school who could not give scholarships,
Yeah.
and they would try to help with as much financial aid as possible.
Right.
And if you were ahead of the game when you're 12 and start building a following, the school may not matter.
Yeah.
And we see this with a lot of, especially these like YouTube golfers, where it wouldn't matter what school they were going to, they're going to be doing well with their following. It didn't matter where the Cavender twins played college basketball.
Right.
They were going to be doing very well with their social media following and their NIL opportunities. But does it start to impact financial aid? Again, not only for them, but now for their younger siblings who may not be athletes? Or is there an impact when it comes to financial aid opportunities that are available?
So I talked to two different FAFSA sort of experts. I couldn't find anyone who knew the answer. And then I started Googling like people that help families with their FAFSA applications. And
Okay.
I found two people who had incredible credentials, and I asked them about that. And they both agreed that it would have no impact on a sibling's FAFSA,
Okay.
that is
That's
not going to
good.
be an issue. So I'm glad, because I thought that it might be. However, for the athlete who's earning the NIL money, it can be problematic. There's this weird space you could be in where you're earning so much that you no longer qualify for need-based aid, but you're not really earning enough to make up for the need-based aid that you're losing. So there's this weird like no man's land. And I can't remember exactly what the numbers are, but I remember Tim Duncan, who's now a deputy AD at Memphis. He was previously the athletic director at University of New Orleans. And I remember at the beginning of NIL, he did a webinar with a couple of other people, and they talked about this sort of weird space you could end up in where if you are earning some, you might earn just enough to knock yourself out of need-based aid, but not enough to actually make up for the need-based aid you're losing. So there is that weird kind of no man's land there. And I'm by no means an expert, but I know that it has been problematic in some cases.
Yeah, we're going to have a FAFSA. Her name's actually the FAFSA guru. We're going to have her on an episode. So I'm going to make sure I link all these together and ask her that question, because that is intriguing. That at what point some of these schools are so expensive that, and if you're playing a sport like tennis that doesn't give you a full scholarship, and the NIL deal doesn't cover the remainder of the tuition that's necessary, now are you messing up what you can qualify for aid? And does it deter kids from doing NIL stuff?
For other kids, it's advantageous. Like when you mentioned tennis, I was thinking there's actually an athlete who's in my book, Shani Idolet, and I did a speaking engagement with her at NCAA convention a couple of years ago. She's a tennis athlete at Clark Atlanta University, and she actually talked about a deal she did with H&R Block, ironically enough, since we were just talking about them. There was a deal she did with them. This has probably been 2 or 3 years ago now, and that deal paid what she owed in tuition for the next semester. So it was huge for her, because she was going to have to take out loans. And that one NIL deal kept her from having to take out loans for the next semester. So, I would say in most instances, it ends up working out for the better. I haven't heard a lot of cases where I think it's a very narrow window where you're just in this weird no man's land where you make like just enough for it to be problematic, but not enough to help you. So you definitely want to consult an advisor. Definitely not my area of expertise, but on the FAFSA front, and I think maybe who you're speaking with is one of the folks that I spoke with, because I was afraid it would hurt your siblings, and obviously we wouldn't want that to happen.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Wealth on the Move, the podcast, brought to you by Hoffman Wealth Management. Here at Hoffman Wealth Management, we focus on working with busy families and active retirees, helping them navigate the complicated scenarios of their wealth while building the life that they desire. And we believe that every financial journey deserves direction. That is exactly what our proprietary process, the HWM navigation formula, provides. Just like a GPS, our navigation formula begins with two key questions. Where are you now? What does your financial picture currently look like? And where do you want to go? What goals and dreams do you have? From there, we help you navigate every financial turn en route to your desired destination with clarity and confidence. It's more than a plan, it's a personalized path forward. If you want to learn more on how the navigation formula can work for you, reach out through the contact options in the show notes below. We would love to help you chart your next move. Now, back to this episode of Wealth on the Move, the podcast. So moving down the ladder from college to high school. And again, we'll preface this by saying if it's a state that permits their high school athletes to participate in NIL deals, I'm going to assume they're not as lucrative, but they might be. I mean, who knows? You have some of these folks like, who's the 16-year-old golfer on YouTube, Gabby Golf Girl, who she may never play in college because she may not need to. Who knows what? I mean, the sky's the limit. At what point, parents can often and hopefully they're not, I had a coach one time say to me, I can coach an angry kid, I can't coach a delusional father. When should parents start to think about these things when they recognize that, okay, maybe sports at the next level is an option for my son or daughter? What steps should parents and the kids be taking to make sure that they are putting themselves in a position to capitalize?
I think there's a couple of different levels. So you've got the athletes who maybe they're even going to be Division I quality, but we're not talking about top 25 ranked high school men's basketball players. So for example, there is a athlete whose parent is in my Facebook group, and actually the athlete is in my book. Her name is Reese Lechner. Reese is now 13, but when I first met her and her mother, she was 10. And Reese, her mom came in my group because Reese wanted to be the youngest athlete to get an NIL deal. Like she came to her mom and it was her that wanted to do it. She got beat out by an 8-year-old golfer. So she was not the youngest. But
I got a 7-year-old at home. And
he was male. So she got, I think, youngest for a female that we know of. Deals are not always publicized, but sort of what we knew of at the time. So now flash forward 3 years later, and Reese has done quite a few deals. In fact, I was just working with her mom on a media kit last week. She just did a deal with a deodorant brand, and she took this deodorant on her family trip to Colorado Springs, and she was doing these great photos in Garden of the Gods with this, holding this like stick of deodorant. But this is all driven by her. This is not her parents putting pressure on her to do NIL deals. It's Reese saying, I want to do it. And I was talking to her mom, Hannah, and Hannah was even saying, she goes through phases. Like she's super interested and into it for a little while, and then she gets busy with her friends or sport or whatever, and she's not. So if your kid wants to do it, I think, encourage them all you can. And I can give a couple of tips for sort of how to get started. But there's the other side of that where there's going to be some, I would say maybe, I don't know if I call it pressure, but some external pressure or opportunities. For example, those that are ranked at the very top of really visible sports like football and men's basketball. I sat down with a mom at this NBA junior event, and her son doesn't have an agent right now, but they've already had people approaching them. They've had people waiting for them after tournaments who want to like walk through the parking lot with them in ways that are kind of creepy, frankly. And they don't feel like they want to hire an agent right now, but he's got brands in his DM that want to work with him because he's one of the most highly ranked high school basketball athletes right now. So you've got those two ends of the spectrum where, sure, if your kid's interested in it, encourage them. You can set social media accounts up early and you can sort of play around with it. And then you've got those kids who they don't even know if they're interested in it or not, but brands are coming to them either because they already have a huge following on social for some reason, or they're elite in their sport and they're getting these opportunities based on their performance. So in either instance, the advice I gave actually to both moms was social media is the low hanging fruit. That's where a lot of the opportunities lie. Now, that's not to say there aren't other ways to monetize your NIL. There absolutely are, but social media is the low hanging fruit. And my best advice I can give you for social media is don't make it all about your sport. So in the book, I talk about this thing called the 3 buckets challenge. And I ask athletes to think of 3 sort of main things that they want to be known for or that they enjoy. So we know their sport's going to be one of them, but we've got kind of 2 more buckets to fill. And that can be, hobbies and interests, like you're really into fishing or you're really into hunting or you love fashion, you love sneakers, that can be any sort of interest outside of your sport. And you might have 2 of those kind of things. Maybe you love fishing and you love hunting, or maybe your dog is a huge part of your life. We have seen quite a few athletes now get deals for their dog. I don't think we've seen a cat yet. There may have been one and it just hasn't been publicized, but it's mostly been for dogs. And I have a friend who works in a social media marketing agency, and all she does is rep dogs. And she told me dogs make more than humans. And I thought, my German Shepherd is laying right here on the floor next to me. Like, she is not pulling her
tell
weight.
her, I was going to say, tell her to get up off the floor and go make a few bucks here.
So I tell them, like, your dog can be one of your buckets, but the idea is to have 2 or ideally 3 things that you are representing in your content. Because if it's all your sport, sure, you'll attract some deals relevant to your sport, equipment brands in your sport, that sort of thing. But if you get hurt or you decide to stop playing, that's it. It's over, because that's all you had.
Right.
In fact, I had University of Florida's quarterback in my class last year, and we were talking about this and talking about how he needed to have, more than just football in his Instagram feed. He got hurt the week after we did that module in class and is never playing again. And I hope I didn't jinx him. But,
right.
We had just talked about how you can't have just your sport, because that means it's over when your sport is over. But if you have your hobbies and other lifestyle things, it can carry you beyond graduation or just beyond playing your sport. And so one of the final chapters in the book, I talk to athletes who did NIL for a little bit, but now they've graduated and they've been able to take deals with them past graduation. And it's because they had lifestyle and hobby-based content, and that didn't change when they stopped playing their sport or when they graduated from college. So if you are going to start a social media presence for or with your athlete, I strongly, strongly advise you to have 2 or 3 different things that you post about regularly versus having the entire feed be your sport.
Yeah, that's great advice. It was kind of answered my next question for me before I even got to ask it about turning this into a profession, because I mean, you remember the NCAA's commercial for a long time was most of our athletes are going professional in something other than sports. And now a lot of my wife and I talk about this all the time, how envious we are of kids leaving college now, because they can be their business. Their brand can be their business, and they can just film and photograph themselves living and earn, and do that from Bali or from traveling the world in a camper van, while we had to go sit in a cubicle and sell steel studs.
Yeah.
It's a little scarred for life there on my part, but that's, the opportunities in front of them can start by being a great pitcher and carry into, like you said, hunting, fishing, other brands. A lot of, just to use the baseball analogy, until you get to the major leagues, that's a tough life. Minor league baseball is a tough life. It's not always a very profitable life. Are we seeing athletes that aren't going immediately to the highest level kind of reconsider playing minor league baseball or D League basketball, or what is it now? The G League. I'm sorry. playing these minor league roles because they can continue to profit off of their NIL experience.
I think a lot of them can supplement. Like I know a couple of guys who did go in the MLB draft straight from high school who, are in the minors and toiling away and not making a ton of money, but they already had a social media following and that's another revenue stream for them. Even athletes that aren't in professional sports. I had several athletes I worked with the first or second year of NIL who went on, one to be a teacher and one to be a nurse. And those were both jobs that did not pay very much starting out, but both of them had huge social media followings and it wasn't just about their sport. So they were able to keep making money from brand deals after they graduated and supplement, whereas, when I graduated from college 22 years ago or whatever it was now, a lot of my friends, their parents were helping to pay their rent because that first job they got out of college wasn't enough to cover all of their expenses. And so they were still having to rely on their parents. And now I know college athletes who are graduating and yes, their entry level job right after college isn't paying that much, but they're supplementing it with these deals that they're still able to do on the side, which I think is why it's so important to build your brand beyond just your sport.
Yeah.
And then for athletes who are like college athletes that are on that bubble between going pro and staying in college, the ones who are trying to decide, are they going to come back for, one more year in football or with basketball, the ones that would have been one and dones, we are seeing a growing trend of athletes choosing to stay in college because in some cases they can make more money, especially with female basketball players.
Yeah.
They are making so much money in endorsements, and there have been stories written on this. The WNBA salaries are not great starting out. And so some of them were making better money from the NIL collectives when they were in college than they're being offered in the WNBA, which is a whole nother problem we could do an entire show on. But, we do see athletes making the choice to stay extra years because of the income opportunities in college sports right now.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's
interesting phenomenon. Yeah.
That's interesting. I would have stayed in college as long as I could have, regardless of the profitability, but that's again another episode at another time. So the biggest question that I receive from athletic director friends or parents and other athletes: how do you price your NIL rights? How do you create that value, or I should say create? How do you determine that value to make sure you can say to a brand, no, I want this much because of what? How do kids or athletes or parents help their student athletes do that?
There's a lot of resources for that. There for social media, there's online calculators. Now, it's going to be based on usually just your followers. Some of those calculators tap into your account and they also base it on your engagement. So you can use those calculators as a starting point, but they don't take into consideration some other things like if the deal is exclusive, like say for the next 3 months you can't work with any other makeup brands, you would need to get paid more. If you're giving an exclusivity window, then the brand should be paying you more because you might potentially be turning down other deals because you're exclusive with this brand. It also doesn't take into consideration your individual audience. So sure, a calculator can tell you, based on how many followers and your engagement, but it can't tell you that, hey, 85% of my audience all loves fishing. So when a fishing brand wants to do a deal with me, like and this is not true. That is not what mine's like. But let's say you were, there's a value on having a niche audience. And so I hate to keep coming back to the book, but when I wrote the book, I wanted a better calculator. And I had read a book years ago by a woman named Brittany Hennessy. It was called Influencer, and it was written for non-athlete influencer. I think that book's I think it just had its 10-year anniversary maybe. But I got to know Brittany after she wrote the book, and she's worked in influencer relations for Hearst magazines. She's at Sprout Social now. Like there's no one I know who knows more about influencers and brand deals than Brittany. And so I went to Brittany and I said, is there any chance I could talk you into doing the pricing model for my book? Because I'm in her online community she has for influencers, and I had seen her share a pricing sort of matrix and it was so good, but I didn't want to just steal it from her. And so I'm very grateful that she did do that part of the book with me. And she talks about having a base rate that's based on your engagement essentially. And then all of these things, these multipliers you would put on that base rate for things like exclusivity or having a niche audience. And she gave pricing for Instagram versus YouTube versus TikTok. I think we even talked about how to price yourself for public speaking, because now we see athletes getting compensated for public speaking. So there's that. And then there's just talking to other athletes as well and figuring out what they're getting in their brand deals. I found athletes, especially when they're on the same team, tend to share a lot of that kind of information. And there's a few social media accounts out there too, more in the broader influencer space, where they post deals. There's one that's called FYFP, and I won't tell you exactly what that stands for, but it's FU pay me, I think. But it's great because they put up screenshots that influencers send in, and the influencer will say, for example, I'm a 22-year-old female, I have 105,000 followers, and I was offered a deal from Mattel to promote the new Barbie movie for X amount of money. Like, they give details of their deals. And so you can scan through their Instagram account and you can get a feel for what people maybe in a similar position are getting. And then you would add on to that, if you say you're an athlete and it's a sports related product that's in your niche. So it might be a little bit more than an average influencer would get paid to do that. So it's not an exact science, I'm sorry to say.
Okay. Well, you have given us a ton of information. We have some quick hit questions all about NIL money or NIL opportunities that I want to ask. I guess the first one is, what do you see as the biggest NIL market inefficiency right now?
It's probably just matching brands with athletes. All these marketplaces popped up at the beginning of NIL to help facilitate that. But I think there were so many in the broader marketplace that it was hard for any one of them to get traction. That has changed over time. There's not as many now. A lot of them weren't well capitalized and simply don't exist anymore. But I still think there's that sort of gap where there isn't one place that's efficiently matching up athletes with opportunities.
Okay. What's the most undervalued NIL opportunity or underrated that folks are kind of skipping over?
It's, I think, lessons, camps, and clinics. So I played softball my whole life, and I opted not to play in college. I went to a college that didn't have a team. So instead, I taught pitching lessons when I was in college because I could make money doing that. But like a college softball player couldn't because of the NIL rules.
Okay.
And I made good money in like 1999 to 2003 when I was in college teaching pitching lessons. And in fact, I ended up getting hired by a local high school to be their pitching coach. But current college athletes wouldn't have the time to put in to be a coach. But those lessons, I made tons of money. And I found some athletes for the book who were doing individual lessons, or they were partnering with maybe a former coach or a former training facility to put on camps and clinics during the summer. Those can be great ways to make money. And it doesn't really matter what school you go to. It doesn't matter how big your social media following is. The fact that you are a college athlete, or even I taught some lessons when I was a high school athlete to like kids that were just learning how to pitch at like 8 years old. I mean, as long as you're a little ahead of the kids that you're coaching, parents will seek that out. And I'm sure anyone who has a kid that's playing sports knows parents will spend a lot of money for their athlete to be better. And so that to me is a really untapped space. And there's even some cool resources now that didn't exist when I was doing it, where you can do lessons online. You don't even have to be there in real time.
Wow,
you could have the athlete, record themselves pitching. And I mean, I could watch a video and tell somebody what they were doing wrong if the camera was set up at the right angle. Or you can teach skills. There's a platform where, maybe I want to teach somebody how to throw a curveball. I could actually record myself and record the mechanics and how to grip the ball. And you can sell that recording, and that's passive income. You record it once, you put it up there, and then you collect. So there's some really cool opportunities to do stuff like that.
That's great insight. That's great advice. Where do you think NIL is going to be in 5 years?
I don't know that it's going to change that much from what it is right now, except that hopefully by that point, all 50 states will allow high school and youth athletes to be doing it, because that's kind of the biggest discrepancy I see right now.
Okay. And what is one red flag that screams this is a bad NIL deal?
Somebody pressuring you to sign it fast. I just had a parent not too long ago bring me a deal from an NIL collective for his daughter. And I told him some issues I saw, but I was like, you really need to have an attorney that can give you legal advice because I can't give you legal
Right.
advice. Look over this. And he said, but they want us to, this was like Tuesday. He's like, they said we have to sign it by Friday. No, red flag.
Right. Yeah. That's probably the one piece of advice from my mother that I hear in my own head over and over again. And if you're going to make me rush, the answer is no.
Yep.
And I tell folks the same thing when it comes to investment advice. And if they are in a hurry, so should you be, and get the hell out of there.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. One thing that is not really NIL related, that is a tradition on the Wealth on the Move podcast, and I have totally stolen this from the Diary of a CEO podcast, and he does something really cool that links all of his guests together. Because I have a question from one of our previous guests that I'm going to ask you, and then you're going to have the opportunity to ask a question of our next guest. Okay. Now, this one's kind of intense. It kind of floored me when she gave it to me, but it's from our last guest, who is Kelly Bender. We did a great episode on the new tax code and the one big beautiful bill. Something that if your athletes are looking for tax implications of all of this, it'd be a great episode to check out. But when you are standing at the end of your life looking backwards, who or what did you care way too much about that it is not in the picture anymore?
Ooh.
Yeah, it floored me. I was...
I mean, my gut instinct is just to say in general other people's, opinions. Like, I'm a people pleaser. I say yes to way too many things. I was just having a conversation with my husband the other day about the number of people in my inbox wanting to have calls with me, and that I literally do not have the time. I cannot make the time to do it. But I hate telling people no. I feel like a horrible person, and like they think I'm, such a brat because I say no. And so yeah, I wish I didn't care about strangers' opinions. I mean, it's one thing to care about the people in my life that matter, that know who I really am, but yeah, it would be the opinions of strangers.
Yeah, that's great insight, especially if there are high school kids listening to this right now. That seems to be when we always cared way too much about other people's opinions, and looking back,
it gets easier the older you get. I care less now than I did 10 years ago, and hopefully 10 years from now I'll care even less.
All right, so what is your question for our next guest?
Okay, I think I've got a good one because I was thinking about doing this morning as a TikTok. I had a quote that popped in my mind this morning, and I realized like it's a quote I come back to over and over and over. I mean, over the last 20 years, I can't tell you the number of times I've said this quote to people. And I got to thinking, like, that's probably the quote that best I didn't say it, someone else did. But like, if there was a quote that most defined like who I am, it's this quote. And I don't mind telling what the quote is, but I would love to know what other people's is. Like, what is a quote or a saying that you have sort of lived your life by?
Okay. That's a great question. Yes. What's yours?
Okay. So it's a quote from Nora Roberts, who, if you know, is a romance author, but this had nothing to do with her romance books. And it's longer than this, but the piece that I sort of live by is, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And I have always been willing to ask for what I want. And I was thinking about that this morning for athletes who are afraid to reach out to brands. And it's like, but if you don't reach out to them, the answer is no, because you didn't give them the opportunity to say yes.
It's a golf, to translate that to a golf term, the short putts never go in.
Yeah.
And if you're not working hard enough, if you're not working, being strong enough, if you're not putting the effort in, the short putts never go in. And that's probably, I guess that'd be the one I would use. Well, Kristi Dosh, thank you so much for joining us. All of the information you gave us, we're going to get from you so we can put in the show notes links to the resources that you mentioned for athletes and for parents. We'll have a link to the book, The Athlete's NIL Playbook. Please check it out. I didn't get all the way through it yet, but I'm going to, because again, I've just been captivated by this since it started. I've been captivated by it, watching folks like Johnny Manziel get in trouble for selling autographs. And I mentioned to you at the onset, we are in Terrell Pryor country, and, seeing the melee that ensued after he was, got in some trouble for things he probably shouldn't have, because it was his stuff. This has captivated the college sports world. It's captivated the financial world. and the information that you gave us today was very captivating. So thank you so much for joining us. Where can our listeners find you and follow you if they want more information?
So businessofcollegesports.com has been my website for a decade and a half now. So it's got the latest news on NIL. If you want more about the book and some of the extra resources that go with the book, that is at theathletesnilplaybook.com. And I'm on pretty much every social media channel, and I have the same username on every channel. It's Sports Biz Miss, MISS at the end.
That's great. That's a great, that should be one of your pieces of advice. A great handle can do a lot. And that's a great handle.
Thank you.
Well, again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for tuning in to Wealth on the Move, the podcast. My name is Will Hoffman. You can find me, hoffmanwealth.com is our website. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me just under my name, Will Hoffman. But remember, until the next episode, keep your wealth moving.
Kristi Dosh and Business of College Sports are not affiliated with Hoffman. Wealth Management and Private Advisor Group, Hoffman Wealth. Management and Private Advisor Group do not provide tax or legal advice. This presentation is not intended as specific financial, tax, or legal advice for any individual. Please consult with qualified professionals for these types of advice.